Are you really getting into Bitcoin if you're not taking self-custody of the Bitcoin? And I would argue no. Bitcoin puts politicians and governments in competition with each other. What if they tax it to oblivion? What about capital gains tax? What if they do this stuff? It's like, well, if you have Bitcoin in self-custody, you just leave. You just grab your words and go. What happens to all of your other stuff? You know, your property, your registered government accounts, your stocks, your business. Nothing else is movable except your Bitcoin. If you think there's a 0.1% chance that the government might do something to oppress you and your wealth in the future, you should probably just own some Bitcoin in self-custody. If we have enough Bitcoiners that stack sats religiously, stay humble, have some self-custody, we do have an opportunity to change this country. The incentives to lie on a fiat standard are so great, and the incentives to tell the truth are minimal. And on a Bitcoin standard, that's completely reversed. No one's dumb enough to save in dollars right now. That would be so stupid. You'd be like, all right, I got my money under my mattress. I'm good to go for 50 years. Like, my kids are going to be so thankful for this 150 grand I've got for them. No one's that stupid.
Hi Adam, how are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Yeah, man, we're doing well. We're doing well. How are you guys?
Well at the Bitcoin well. I love that.
That's right. That's actually, so that was kind of the final deciding moment for the company name was, so like the actual purpose behind Bitcoin Well is like a well of water. Kind of the thought process being, when you go found a new jurisdiction or a new land or a new country, the first thing you got to do is drill a well. And that's, the water is the breath of the entire, spot. And so Bitcoin obviously being the key to our financial sovereignty, Bitcoin Well is that first piece. But then the double entendre of Bitcoin Good, it was just like, oh, this is perfect. I just couldn't pass it up. And so Bitcoin Well came to be.
That's really cool, and I guess it was a really good year, and it was a crazy year this year with the halving, with the ETFs, with the 100K, and let's see where we go in the last, what is it, 14, 15 days that we have. How was the year for you? What were some of your highlights?
Dude, you just reminded me that ETFs were earlier this year. This has been probably the busiest year in Bitcoin. That is absolutely madness that it was. I remember actually 2024 being like, whoa, it's starting off with a bang. And then, here we are, Bitcoin just following its cycle. But yeah, man, I mean, things have been great. We've been we've been busy. We expanded into all 50 states this year. So that's been super great. We've been working hard on making sure that, we are really, we're a different platform from, traditional Bitcoin exchanges. We're non-custodial. You cannot leave coins on platform. And that comes with a whole slew of challenges. You're kind of like double educating people in, oh, hey, Bitcoin is good. You should buy some. And oh, by the way, you can't just leave it in your account here. You have to also get a wallet. And here's your seed phrase. And here's your address. And it's like, it just is unbundling this entire educational piece. That's probably going to be our greatest advancement in 25 is just picking up that educational piece.
Did you ever think about making two-step process of like having the options of having also custodial, because a lot of new beginners probably are overwhelmed with the 12 words and the stuff like that?
Yeah, it's definitely been it's a topic of mine. It has been for 10 years. Ultimately, I feel very convicted as a Bitcoiner that knows better that the easy path is not the path that we should strive for. And I think that it's very, very important for, at minimum, custodian and broker to be separated. I think that the incentives, like FTX, does not happen. Everyone's like who in their right mind thinks that FTX was good for the industry in 2025? Nobody. There are, right? There's nobody that thinks that. Nobody's arrogant enough or stupid enough to think that they were doing good things. And the FTX rug pull, frankly, is not possible in a non-custodial environment. And so I think that, the argument of, hey, wouldn't this be better if more people can onboard and more people getting into Bitcoin? It's like, are you really getting into Bitcoin if you're not taking self-custody of the Bitcoin? And I would argue no. I don't think if you hold an ETF, you're into Bitcoin. I don't think, if you own MSTR, you're into Bitcoin. And I think that the key to being, into Bitcoin is self-custody. And so what that means for us is, obviously targeting a smaller niche, but doing that small niche, as good as possible, and then understanding that that niche, like this is going to be the fastest growing niche in the world, is Bitcoiners that finally understand and then need to take self-custody of their Bitcoin.
That's super interesting. I was recently in Abu Dhabi at the Bitcoin conference, Bitcoin MENA, I think it
Nice.
was called. And there was one main talk at the main stage where I forgot who asked the question, but someone asked the question, raise your hand if you ever tried self-custody. And I was shocked. Like 50% of the hands went up, and yeah, maybe 60% because 10% of the audience doesn't want to raise their hands.
Yeah.
But like, but even at a Bitcoin conference, there's not everyone into self custody. And when I talk to my Bitcoin friends outside of the Bitcoin community, they're like normal friends that just have a lot of money in Bitcoin. They all have it on custodial, and I'm like trying to orange pill them since 4 years that there are huge savings that they have in Bitcoin, move them off exchanges.
Yeah.
And it's a really hard topic. And the question in mind is like, okay, if we define a Bitcoiner as someone who has his Bitcoin in self-custody, how many are we? Like,
Small, man. And this
it's
is
small.
and this is part of what gives me this conviction that I'm talking about, because if we all say, okay, fine, we'll just be custodial, then no one will need to take self-custody. We are, as a species, the path leads. Like you and I do this for a living. We think about Bitcoin 24/7, man. I went and saw a movie with my wife. We went and saw Wicked. Have you seen that movie? It's about
No,
like the Wizard of Oz, like the
no.
Wicked Witch of the West.
When you say Wicked, I have to think about Wicked, the UTXO guy on Twitter.
Okay. That's exactly. You are not the first person that said that, so I get it. But it's like it's a movie about like Wizard of Oz. It's like a Broadway play turned into a movie, and it's like got like corrupt government and mass misinformation through centralized channels, blah blah blah. And I like look over at my wife and I'm like, you know what this movie's about, right? And she's like, if you say Bitcoin right now, I'm gonna smack you. I'm like, but you do know it's about Bitcoin, don't you? We are always on Bitcoin, 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 Bitcoin. And I think that there is more and more people who are not always on Bitcoin, 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 that understand the importance of self-custody. And I think that if we have platforms that allow for custodial nonsense to occur, and let me be super clear. What I mean for that is coins in the same place where you buy. I firmly believe that self-custody is a barrier. I understand that fully. And I also think that collaborative custody is a dynamite solution, meaning, we as the platform would send your coins to a place that maybe you don't have full control of. Maybe you've worked with a custodian that's going to help you take, partial custody and then move that into full self-custody down the line. But in no uncertain terms are the coins off Bitcoin well. We are non-custodial in that way. And that is so important because the incentives then become acutely aligned, where we want to make the best platform for you to buy and control Bitcoin, and not the best platform that incentivizes you to keep Bitcoin with us, because there's just issues there.
You're in America, Canada, but Europe not, or
Right.
still?
Yeah. So we're live in Canada and USA, but not in the. We did though. We did buy a Bitcoin ATM network in 2021, I think, in the UK, and then like 3 months later, the UK pretty much brought the ban hammer for Bitcoin ATMs. So we were. It was a quick entry and a quick exit, but yeah, it's man, the EU it's a sketchy place to be.
Absolutely, yeah. But I have a hope for them. Like if you see the last election, and I talked actually today with someone from TerraHash, the organization in Germany, and they actually say with the last EU election, a lot of the things that they were worried about are now kind of going in the right direction, because a lot of more right-leaning parties winning, parties that are against the EU, parties that see that ECP, the euro, and the whole Digital Service Acts and stuff like that, what's going on, critical, those are moving up, which means for me that the EU citizens are waking up a little bit to the reality,
Yes.
which gives me a lot of hope. If the people wake up in a country, hopefully also the politicians move afterwards.
Yeah, man. I mean, they're going to have to, right? This is, and obviously we think it takes too long, but this is how the world should work, where it should be the people demanding what's best of the politicians, not the politicians and the bureaucrats dictating what will enrich them to their citizens. And I think that, what's changed. Like, look at what has changed over the last 10 years, and it's been decentralized protocols for media, for communications, coupled with the number one money protocol on the planet. And effectively, I think Bitcoin's working. I think I would attribute a little bit of that success to Bitcoin and Bitcoiners having that edge of, hey, you can't control my money anymore. And I think that's really, really positive.
And then I think it's really important to note that Bitcoiners, like politicians need Bitcoin, but Bitcoin doesn't need the politicians. And
Boom,
this,
man.
this was so, and I don't know if you saw it. Did you saw the German finance minister today on his speech talking about Bitcoin?
No. Like 6 months. What was it? 6 months they just dumped on the market. Was that when it
Yeah,
was?
the same Germany that dumped Bitcoin, the finance minister, because today the government is officially in Germany over. They just collapsed, and now in February there is a new election. And today there was the last speech, like the last a speech of the government. There's like a small temporary government till the new election, but it was the last day. And the finance minister, since 4 years he's there, the first time ever he mentioned Bitcoin. And today he was like, oh, why did we not do that? Basically. And he put everything on the other parties, but he was the finance minister. So
Wow, man. Yeah, man. And that's it. Like, Bitcoin humbles you. Like, I think what you said is so perfect. And it it leads us down this track of understanding that Bitcoin kind of puts politicians and governments in competition with each other. And like, people are all afraid, well, what if they tax it to oblivion? What about capital gains tax? What if they do this stuff? It's like, well, if you have Bitcoin in self custody, you just leave. You just grab your words and go. It's the easiest answer in the world. What happens to all of your other stuff? Your property, your registered government accounts, your stocks, your business. Like, nothing else is movable except your Bitcoin. And so if you think there's a 0.1% chance that the government might do something to oppress you and your wealth in the future, you should probably just own some Bitcoin in self-custody. This is the math. This is the logic. There's literally no downside, especially if you're already going to own Bitcoin. It's crazy. It is, yeah, it's mind-blowing to me.
and there's in every country a 0.01% chance that happens. Really
Literally
interesting.
across the world.
Absolutely. And you are from Canada, I think.
Yeah.
So how is Canada right now? Canada is for me always the trucker movement, and still
Yeah.
until then I only heard even worse things from Trudeau with like at some point even like with a credit system, like in a social credit system, like in China. I heard some news around that, but I don't really follow the Canadians news cycle. How is Canada right now? And one more thing that I want to give is that most Canadians I talk to, most Bitcoin Canadians I talk to, already are outside of Canada for some reason. How is Canada and Bitcoin right now?
Yeah, man. Bitcoin is very needed in Canada right now. You're right. Like, the trucker protest, I think, woke everybody up. The tyranny went too far. The outright lies went too far, and a large portion of Canada woke up to what's happening, and it created a lot of Bitcoiners in the country. Still, though, which is hilarious, I bet you 1 in 5 people that you talk to on the street would say that the trucker protest was a terrorist organization, and they were creating mass terror. That this is the federal narrative for that protest, and it's shocking. And so I think that that's really, really interesting, just seeing that, lots of people are awake to the fact that the government is evil here in Canada. Um, but there's still a grip. There's still a healthy grip on the population. That said, I think that Canada is producing some of the most hardened Bitcoiners than any nation. Per capita, we've got to be the best nation in the world for Bitcoiners coming out of Canada. And the community here is strong. I think that it's just because the level of tyranny that we experience here, the banking, like the centralization. We've got monopolies in telecom, monopolies in banking. We've got monopolies in power and energy. We're just Canada loves its monopolies, and the free market hates them. And we finally have a tool to take that power back in Bitcoin. People are finding it, and people are using it, and I think we're pushing back a little bit. So it's pretty good.
Is there hope? Like, is there elections coming up? I think I heard something with next year's elections.
Next year, they'll have an election. I don't put much hope in elections. Frankly, I don't think elections, like, they maybe steer you back into the path, but the whole system has to be completely rebuilt. Everyone is like Trump will do probably good things for lots of things, and he's still going to print probably trillions of dollars. And when you think that the good guy is going to be printing trillions of dollars, you realize that the system is completely broken. And it's kind of irrelevant from my perspective which color is in the chair. I think that Bitcoiners, and as Bitcoiners, we are called to a much higher standard than fighting across the aisle. And our seemingly incoming premier, his name's Pierre Poilievre. He understands sound money. He understands fiscal responsibility and good economic policy, and all that's very positive. I think that it will obviously be a massive positive, but he will still be printing money, and he will still be funding a government that spends more than it brings in. We will still have record taxes. We will still have a record high capital gains rate. It will still not be a Bitcoin standard environment, and I think that we are still probably decades away from that Bitcoin standard environment. But I will say there is hope. I think that there is enough people that, because you're right, people are leaving. People in Canada, there's lots of Canadians abroad. And even my wife and I decided, or we're discussing, like, what do we do? Do we stay? Do we go? Where do we go? What's better? We have 4 kids, and so raising the children in a good environment is very important to us. And we ultimately landed on, staying in Canada, with me having a unique opportunity to have a hand in saving this country. Because I think it's possible. I think that if we have enough Bitcoiners that stack sats religiously, stay humble, have some self-custody, we do have an opportunity to change this country. And I'm bullish on that for sure.
It's super interesting, that debate, because we always say, like, we said it today in the podcast already, that Bitcoin, the politicians need Bitcoin, Bitcoin doesn't need politicians. But at the same time, we are human beings in a physical environment, in a jurisdiction that has control over us, that cares about us in a good and a bad sense, caring about us. So it's like, as a Bitcoiner, you're in that weird position. You have an asset that doesn't care about politics, but you still should care what politics does to you, and what kind of rules they lay on you, and what kind of the system does. Even though I see a lot of Bitcoiners that say, like, I don't want to do anything with politics, and I just live my life, which I think could be dangerous to yourself. How do you look at, like, how much should we pay attention and care about the political systems and the change that we are seeing?
Yeah, man, I probably go back and forth from, this kind of like, whatever, it's all rigged anyways, and, I'm going to just put my head down and do what I can, back to, like, oh, hey, maybe I'll have the ability to influence and make positive change. And I probably bounce between those two mindsets, like, very frequently. I think that my current mindset, so you're getting, talk to me tomorrow and maybe it'll be different. But I would probably fall in the mindset of having cautious optimism that the efforts we're making will make a change, coupled with understanding. Have you heard of the Cobra Effect?
Cobra? No, I didn't.
It's this the Cobra Effect is this concept that an unnatural force kind kind of putting energy or restrictions into an environment will always have negative effects on the macro. And so it stems from like the 1500s. The British government took over India, and there was a bunch of cobras, like wild cobras, were eating the citizens of India. And so the British government, in their royalty, decided that was bad, and so they put a bounty on cobras' heads, so that the citizens were incentivized to go out and kill the cobras and then get paid for it. It was kind of like, decentralized work, gig working. Maybe it was the first ever gig working. They probably didn't have an app to go and track the cobras, but and so then after a while, some people started taking advantage, breeding cobras, and then bringing the bred cobras to the government for beheading, which is wrong. It's immoral, but it was something that was legal. And so afterwards, the government, was probably feeling salty and decided to do away with the cobra bounty. And so all the farmers let the cobras loose, and the cobra problem got 10 times worse than it was, before the government stepped in and tried to fix everything with their magic wands. And so I think that, back to, your question, the government will put in rules, and we can be cobra farmers. We can be the ones that take advantage of the rules, that look around how to manipulate the rules, how to better society in spite of their rules. And I look back to the mission for Bitcoin Well. It's to enable independence. And so, it is important that I have a very strong handle on what the rules are, so that I can learn and figure out how to manipulate the rules in such a way that I am enabling maximum independence. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where I land today. Bitcoin Well, we're publicly traded. We are obviously a money service business in Canada, and on that track in the US. And it's kind of like, we got to know, I'm personally, I'm going to vote or wish and cheer for the politician that will make my business more successful and my mission more possible. Where it gets tricky is, do I believe that politicians will do that? And that's kind of, on either side of the aisle.
I experienced that myself. I voted differently this year round than last year round because of the business, and I was like, my incentives are now different, and this changes my vote actually, which is super interesting. But it's a great story of yours to see how centralized systems bring the wrong incentives. Even if they try to do the right thing, they might do the wrong thing with that.
Bingo. And it's this, I do personally believe that there is a spiritual darkness in the world that is trying to take over. But I also probably understand that there is well-intentioned problems that come in because it's an unnatural force in a natural environment. A great example right now in Canada, the government just put a pause on GST, our general sales tax, which, is like, okay, great. Things get a little bit cheaper. 5%, is the federal sales tax. That's fantastic. But let's look at the downstream effects here. It was only on certain things. It wasn't widespread. It was only in certain areas. And so I have a buddy, one of our ATM hosts and a prominent member of the Vancouver Bitcoin community. He owns a cafe, and he was saying, so they still have to charge GST on merch, but not on coffee and food. And so he had to spend an entire day going through every single SKU of his point of sale system and turning on or turning off the GST. And then he's going to have, so it's for 2 months starting in December, which means you have the end of the year and then the start of the year. So 2 tax years with this, this weird no GST, this partial sales tax for 2 years. And then what that's going to do is it gives everybody the incentive to probably not spend more, but to realize how bad, GST makes things. So it's creating more accounting costs, probably legal costs down the line for whatever, and operational costs, all for a 2-month break. And it's just like, that was probably well-intentioned. It probably didn't think about it. And that's kind of the problem, that they didn't think about it. They don't have the foresight to think, how is this going to help or hurt? And I related it back to the village idiot running around in the winter, lighting people's houses on fire to keep them warm. And it's like, yes, village idiot, fire does create warmth. But when you burn someone's shelter, it doesn't help anybody. And the government is just in a habit of burning shelter to try to keep people warm.
Is that what you mean with spiritual darkness?
No, I think it's deeper than that. I think there is there's a physical presence in the world that exists that we can see and touch, and there's a spiritual one. And I think that the spiritual one probably has a lot more influence in our world than we realize. And being aware of that is probably important. And I think that part of the demonic nature of that negative spirit, or that dark spirit, is stemmed by fiat money, stemmed by governments and politicians being able to hammer a button and steal people's wealth. That's a very evil thing to do. And I would say that there's a difference between the village idiot trying to keep people warm and the demon that whispered in the village idiot's ear, hey, go burn the houses to keep the people warm. The demon knows, the dark spirit, whatever you want to call it, they know that it's wrong, and they've taken the idiots to be useful. And I think that's kind of more the play in politics that I see.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's also, for me, always interesting when centralized organizations think they can predict something which they clearly can't predict,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the most obvious thing is the central government that tries to, the central banks that try to predict, like, how much money should we print today? Let's see what we do.
We predict that unemployment will be X. It's like, how? What happens if X, Y, and Z? Like, how are you even qualified to look at on the macro, what businesses are going to need, or, even for smaller things like purchasing patterns and habits. Like, who predicted toilet paper being, such a hot commodity in 2021 or whenever the COVID thing happened? Like, you don't get to predict this stuff. You don't get to think that you've got this all-seeing eye and this all-seeing power. That's not how a free market works. And I think that's evidence. The fact that they are so bold into making these predictions and having these, insights into the world just shows, like, the audacity shows us that they have a lot of control, and they have more control than they let on. And I think that's a problem. And I think that Bitcoin ultimately solves that completely.
When we look back at 2020, how would that be different when we would have a complete Bitcoin standard, because they printed a lot of money back then?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. A Bitcoin standard is so much deeper than the money. It's a proper incentivized system that is, has some meritocracy to it, and has optimism, and has the smart people teaching and not afraid. And I think that the reason COVID was able to happen in the way that it did was because we have gone now 2 generations off the gold standard. And because of that, we are not taking a first principles approach to thoughts anymore. And we've gotten very, very used in our society to money being this abstract tool. And so when they say, put this cloth on your face so that you will stay safe, people say, okay. They don't think, like, really? How? If I told you to burn your house to keep warm in the winter, that would be dumb. You would obviously be like, well, hey, wait a second, I wouldn't have a house anymore. How will that keep me warm? And that's like a big obvious one. But these little tiny micro ones that we are kind of getting now, this is like here in Canada. I'm not sure what it's like in Austria, but like we have paper straws to eliminate plastic, which is like, kind of dumb, but let's just run this down for a second. So the response to that was serving a a drink in a plastic cup with a paper straw, or a plastic cup with a plastic lid and this fancy like drinking apparatus, which statistically uses 80% more plastic than a straw. So it's like, okay, so we wanted to reduce. So again, there's just zero logic. It's like, but there are people that believe like, oh yeah, we're doing the Lord's work here. We're solving the plastic problem. You know, we don't. This straw sucks, but I'll do it willingly because the man on the TV told me that this is saving the earth, and it's like off we go. You know, here in Canada, especially, there's a mountain of people that believe Canada is a net polluter, when in fact we have so much forest here in Canada that our trees consume 110% of all of the pollution that Canada, like all CO2 that Canada throws into the sky, our trees consume 110% of it. We actually have an under pollution problem here in our country. And yet, man on the TV says otherwise. And so we better pay the tax. We better, like abide by the rules. And I think that on a Bitcoin standard, you are actually incentivized not to listen to the man on the TV, because the man on the TV, whether it be a politician or a news guy or like whatever, and I guess also he has an incentive to tell the truth and not to lie, because by lying, they feed their families. Like the incentives to lie on a fiat standard are so great, and the incentives to tell the truth are minimal. And on a Bitcoin standard, that's completely reversed, where the incentive to tell the truth is very, very great. And the incentive to lie is very damning, because when you have a money spigot, your main goal is to get close to the spigot. The closest guy gets the most cash. And you do whatever you need to get there, right? It's like being a part of a gang. Like, you'll kill people to get closer to the gang leader because you know that will better your family and your future. But without the gang leader, you just want to do right by everyone. You have to kind of, tread lightly in society and be bold, but be fair and be balanced and be equal and all this stuff. And so I feel like the Bitcoin standard incentivizes that, whereas the fiat standard, it just incentivizes you to lie and cheat to get closer to the guy that's lying and cheating the best.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. That's a beautiful description of that. Like the Bitcoin brings us closer to the truth because it incentivizes good behavior and incentivizes truthful and integral behavior versus I just want to be closer to the money printer.
Yeah, literally, man. And that's the state. And so we did a video I have a show called Future Proof that I do with GetBased, and we did a video on the difference between corporatocracy and capitalism, and they look similar. And I'd never heard this concept of corporatocracy before, but it's effectively where these large corporations become arms of the government, and it's you can kind of see it in our nation now. And what I deduced from all of this, this like quick video we did on it, was you can tell a nation heading into a corporatocracy by the company's budgets. And if the budget is spent on marketing, that is a budget for the people. That is a free market budget. That's someone wanting to make something and give it to as many people as possible, talk to their consumers. But when the budget is spent on lobbying, that is not a budget for the people. That is a budget that is designed to appease the bureaucrats, to appease the politicians, to appease the money spigot. And you can tell who a company cares about by where they put those dollars. Is it into, lobby groups or into customer groups? And frankly, we want a customer group society, right? We don't want to be a group that just pays the lobby people to go and pay the few people to make our lives easier. We want a group of entrepreneurs and businesses doing the hard thing and talking to the customers and, working in spite of the politicians. And I think that's like a pretty clean line. And I don't know what it's like in Austria, but you look in Canada, there's some pretty massive lobby budgets where, which if replaced with marketing budget or discount or return to shareholder would provide a lot more value to a lot more people.
I think in a lot of sense, Austria is the home of corruption. I don't know. We didn't had a scandal this year, but the last 3 years we had every year a big scandal.
What's a recent scandal?
I mean, the most entertaining one is probably where the vice chancellor was in Ibiza and some guys built a trap for him and they made him believe that he was talking to like a real rich Russian guy. And and then he really talked about, we will buy that newspaper, then we can do that. And like he really talked. Like it is an incredible video to watch. It's like 1 hour long or something like that, or longer than that, maybe 4 hours or something like that. And basically, you get a drunken under truck politician talking about all the things that we are scared of that politicians actually do, buying newspapers with Russian money and stuff like that. And he was the vice chancellor at the time in Ibiza, drunken, under drugs, and filmed with a crew. And it was staged by some newspaper or something like that. And this was I think the biggest scandal that came out in when was that? That's been a long time. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. And then, wild, man. And then the chancellor that was with him had a scandal 1 year later about something completely different, which was actually true. Like the vice chancellor just talked about it, and then the chancellor went ahead and did these things.
He did the things that the vice chancellor was talking about?
No, not the exact things, okay. But systematic things were the same thing. So like, I don't know how it, maybe I don't know about all the things going on in the world, but Austria has a history of corruption, that's for sure.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, it's shocking to me. And we have similar stories in Canada. Obviously, they've got them in the States. And it blows my mind that we still just accept it. And there's no repercussions. Like our guy is going to, get the boot, get completely eviscerated in the next election, and he's going to retire on an incredible pension, all from taxpayer money. And it is just so sad. The misaligned incentives in this fiat standard, bureaucratic, political world are so bad and so sad. And, Bitcoin is a piece of the fix. But honestly, it's an entire awakening of the society that we have to get to that's going to actually fix it.
there are no consequences. That's a weird thing. The chancellor that did that, he now works in America. He has a new consulting agency, made millions every year. I mean, it's private. It's in the private sector. It's fine, I guess. It's not from taxpayers. But still, there's like no real consequences to all those things that politicians do. That's I think that's the real bummer that people don't like about it. That they do that, and then there are no consequences. And usually there are consequences if you do bad things, because every group of people does bad things. Like every there are podcast hosts that did really bad things. There are like from every group of career genres, there are people
Sure.
that did really bad things, but there are consequences too. And I feel like there's like an elite group of politicians that are excluded from that. And if that's a weird rigged thing.
Well, and if like, podcast hosts, like if you do a really bad thing, you probably let some people down. There's some people that probably look up to you and that listen to you and all that stuff. And you let them down, but there's no real harm. There's a letdown. There should be a questioning of, okay, well, what else did Robin say that maybe I should question, given he was doing this behind the scenes and all that. But if we're on a first principles approach society, if we actually think about the way that if we took everything we hear back to ourselves and thought, with my core values, with my beliefs, and with my thoughts, what do I think about this? Do I agree or disagree, and why? Then it's a non-issue. It's like, you don't actually need heroes. You don't actually need to have these big famous people that have all this influence, because everything is a decentralized thought process. And we'll all have general consensus around the large hot button issues, but we don't need some figurehead to be a spokesperson for what it is that we want in the world. And I think that every time you see a scandal and it's headlines and it's all problems, it's evidence of centralization, and that that has varying levels of harm, but centralization just leads to corruption. It's kind of the path.
It's super interesting. We talk about now this Bitcoin system that we're coming, and we're already living kind of in this super cycle of Bitcoin 15 years. It's astonishing how far we already got. Is there a chance in your mind where you see Bitcoin is kind of successful in terms of like it grows to a huge amount of value and a really dominant space in our ecosystem, but it's still just another tool like gold is right now? Gold is still huge. You can take self-custody of gold, you can put it in the bank, you can do all those things. I don't know if anywhere in the world gold is banned. I'm not aware of that, at least.
That's what that was. It was at one point in America. It was illegal to own gold. In 1913. It's called this Executive Order 6102. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, but I was just wondering if it's right now anywhere banned.
No.
Yeah, who's? I think even Seyr talked about that. Like if you owned gold in the last 100 years, no matter where you were on Earth, at some point it got confiscated. Like it got confiscated
Wow.
almost everywhere. I heard that somewhere. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but there's only a few places probably that didn't got confiscated. But the point I was going towards is like, is there a chance that maybe Bitcoin is just another tool set in a larger system, and maybe keeps the fiat system more accountable, but the fiat system is still around? And especially now with all the ETFs, most people have it on exchange. Self-custody is a niche thing within Bitcoin. Do you see that maybe also being a possibility?
I think that it can definitely help keep the fiat system honest. But I think that the more and more that we move towards Bitcoin in a hyper Bitcoinized world, the bigger Bitcoin gets. The fiat system looks less and less and less attractive. And I think that the invention of Bitcoin is probably that, you know, in like 55, maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years, we'll look back on January 3rd, 2009 and be like, that was when everything changed. And, this is the reason we don't have, bloated stock markets with big giant corporations anymore. I think there will still be general activity, general business investing activity, but I don't know that it will be used as a way to safeguard wealth, because we'll have a protocol built in to safeguard wealth. Like, a REIT, like a real estate, portfolio, makes no sense on a Bitcoin standard, because houses are just, like, no one, very, 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 very few people anyways have a car investment trust, because it doesn't make any sense, because cars are depreciating assets. Houses become depreciating assets on a Bitcoin standard. I think that, to outpace Bitcoin, an ETF has to be very, very, very productive and a very, very, very good guesser on what the next big thing is going to be. And I think the opportunity cost in that way will be, I think it'll kind of flip. It'll be as great as holding dollars is today. No one's dumb enough to save in dollars right now. That would be so stupid. You'd be like, all right, I got my money under my mattress. I'm good to go for 50 years. Like, my kids are going to be so thankful for this, 150 grand I've got for them. Like, no one's that stupid in this day and age. I think owning the assets that we deem to be like safe, good investments right now will look like that in whatever, some unknown period of time. Half a century, 2 centuries. I don't know what it will be.
That's super interesting. It's also the question of zombie company is really interesting. As you mentioned, the bloated companies. I looked it up today. Actually, I can pull it up later. It's funny. I looked Bitcoin versus gold and Bitcoin versus real estate in the last 5 years, and Bitcoin 10x the performance of both of them. So like gold went down 94% and Bitcoin went down 91%. And even companies, I think the only one that is sticking out on a 5-year chart is Tesla, that has like 10% more of performance, something like that. There's only a very small amount of companies that can outperform it.
And that's what I mean. Like, the opportunity cost is so great to doing anything that's not. And so what you become is you become a mission focused investor, which is good. Like, investing almost becomes philanthropic. And I think that we then blend the world of we're on a mission to enable independence. We're publicly traded. You could buy our stock. And the reason you'd want to buy our stock is, there will be times when we outpace Bitcoin. We're outpacing Bitcoin so far this year. If we close that way, we probably still will. But that's only on a 1-year time frame. But more than that, you want to own Bitcoin well stock because you believe in our mission to enable independence, because you want to support our mission. You want to play a piece in that mission. You want to know that, when you stack sats at Bitcoin well, you're also a shareholder. You're part of that whole ecosystem. And obviously we hope to make a couple bucks, but more than that, on a Bitcoin standard, investing looks a lot more philanthropic and holistic, which means, again, correct incentives. I, as a CEO, have a lot higher level of responsibility, right? I can't have any scandals because people will actually care, right? Like, it's not like, oh, well, that guy's super bad, but he's making me rich, so it's all, I'll just go ahead and turn a blind eye. It's like, hey, I've actually got other options now. I can go and just store Bitcoin. I am here because I want to be, not because my dollar is eroding at such an incredible rate that I need to be. And that's a power. It's just more decentralization, more power to the people.
It's also interesting to think about what Bitcoin will do to companies, and you run one company, and you already have Bitcoin as your hurdle rate, because you probably have like, okay, I can either buy with, let's say there's coming a $50,000 incoming. I can either buy myself now Bitcoin with that. I can put it on a marketing campaign. I can do whatever with that money. How do you manage that between like, do I just buy Bitcoin or do I spend it on the business? And how will that change companies if their hurdle rate is not, oh, we're losing 5-10% of purchasing power every year, but we're actually gaining purchasing power if we just stick to a Bitcoin standard. How will that change the philosophy and the mindset in companies?
Yeah, I think it will. I think that the risk tolerances go down, which means the smartest people will have to work harder, and we're going to have more. You're going to need to have more certainty of success to move forward. In my mind, I think it looks like working a lot harder. It looks like right now it's very easy to increase your purchasing power because the dollar does that for you automatically, right? Buy anything else in the world, your purchasing power will likely go up. And so it we don't have to work very hard. We have to be lazy. You have to take a couple days off. You don't have to. You can be wrong a bunch. You can't. If you're right a couple times in your career, you're going to be rich. Like this is kind of the world that we live in now. And on a Bitcoin standard, it's not that easy. You have to work pretty hard. You have to, take big swings and be very, very certain that you will hit them. You need to be, pushing the envelope and on the bleeding edge of innovation in order to outpace Bitcoin. And that's good. I think that we're going to see a lot of during this transition period, we're going to see a lot of companies and businesses that were once prominent fail because they've lost that bleeding edge. And then we're going to see a complete resurgence of just brilliant individuals creating maximum value for the world because they will be the ones that actually have a shot. When we were going public, we had we were a real business. We weren't just some pie in the sky vision. We were an actual operating company bringing in tens of millions of dollars of revenue per year, and that hurt us because in the micro cap space, which is where we live, we're like a tiny $40 million company. Investors want to see like moonshot. They don't they're not interested in a few $1,000,000 of revenue. They want to see no revenue and maximum build, which is just such a reverse. Again, the incentives are just wrong. It's perverse. And the second you talk about revenue, you will be valued like a company that builds revenue. But if you don't talk about revenue at all and only talk about the future, then you get clumped into this category of dreamers. You get clumped into this group. I saw this hilarious tweet. It was a fake tweet, but he was talking about San Francisco or about like Palo Alto in like Silicon Valley, and he's like, just met with a guy who raised $10 million for a startup, burnt 9.5 on the team and a cool office, pivoted to AI, and then just raised $50 million. We're so back. It's like that is the epitome of the fiat world right there. Like I had a business, shipped nothing, burnt all the cash, changed the story, and raised 5 times more. And that will just evaporate on a Bitcoin standard. You won't be able to do that anymore, which is a good thing. It probably means the world slows down a little bit, which again is a good thing. It probably means we get off this treadmill, this hamster wheel of a race against fiat, and that's a good thing. So I think businesses go through a rocky period, but strong will survive. And if you're a high-performing individual, you'll be just fine.
And we live in this interesting moment where we have Bitcoin companies playing the fiat games to enhance the Bitcoin stack. I guess Bitcoin well also does that. You're publicly traded. You can play fiat games like MicroStrategy.
Oh man, and it's such a double-edged sword for me. So we actually just launched a product similar to MicroStrategy, where I've been the whole history here is quite interesting from my perspective. I've been quite anti MSTR. I've got a very it's not real Bitcoin. It's not as good as Bitcoin. Number go up is fine, but it's not freedom. And going through that whilst kind of also running a public traded company, I also have a amount of responsibility for my shareholders and for what we do. And so we're doing something similar, which is a little bit different, but we've issued a debt product that converts into equity and that pays interest in equity. And so I've justified it in my head, rightly or wrongly, in such a way that it's basically just a cheaper equity raise. And it's kind of like I do see it as um, a net positive for the shareholder, for our company, certainly. As far as whether or not it's a net positive for the earth, I believe that Bitcoin, well, our mission is very important, and I believe strongly in our mission. And so I do think that we'll take the capital and we'll invest it properly, and we'll build the right platforms that help people, enable their independence and all this stuff. And so it's justified in my head. But it is a wrestling game, similar to my politician vibes, right? Of like, okay, should I vote or should I not vote? Are they good, or can they help me, or should I just stick my head in the sand? Like, it's kind of that same back and forth in my head of, what is our role here? And we're already part of the fiat game. We're on the stock exchange. We're already here. Not doing it felt wrong. Even though, I kind of had these negative thoughts earlier.
It's interesting. But you don't just issue a debt product, buy Bitcoin with it, hold it on. You actually, as you said, you want to invest in the platform and you want to build something with the Bitcoin well.
Yeah. So we're going to the proceeds. So this first one is small. It's a couple $1,000,000, and we're going to just evaluate how that cash is best used. And back to your point, on a Bitcoin standard, like we've got, we know it's about 60%. If you can't outpace 60%, then we shouldn't probably venture on that road. And so, we'll get some cash, and we know that we want to build some things and market some things and talk to our customers, and, definitely not lobby. I do not want, it'll be $0 lobby spent. And then whatever's left over, and that'll go through a rigorous filter of, does this enable independence, and can we outpace Bitcoin? And then, the rest will be used to purchase Bitcoin. We have a little bit of Bitcoin on the balance sheet right now, so we're, kind of in this way. And, that's kind of the future of the company, I think. I think this is a good intermediate kind of term, how the fiat markets get used.
And MSTR is an interesting one for me also, because I've seen it as a distraction. Like, obviously it's a great growth story, and if you have, for example, money locked up in a 401k or pension fund where you just cannot get it out, it might be a really good play, and it has probably a similar risk portfolio than a Bitcoin ETF, and you get more upside to that. Outside of that, I just like Bitcoin in self-custody, and I don't own any MSTR stocks because of that reason, because I don't have money locked up anywhere. But I feel like it's a distraction from Bitcoiner away from self-custody in a similar way than in previous cycles, Bitcoiner got distracted by altcoins because of more gains.
Yeah. Yeah. Number go up has a dark side, man. It's number go up is an important part of money and purchasing power. But there are more important things than the biggest number. And I feel like as a society, we are all addicted to the biggest number. If you made 500%, but you missed out on 1,000, you're mad, you're frustrated. How could I have done that to myself? I've ruined my life. I'm upset, I'm angry. And that's the wrong way to look. I think that we want to understand that owning Bitcoin is not going to be the fastest horse anymore, but it is the safest horse. The fastest horse is at the casino, always. And you're going to have opportunities to go to the gambling area all the time. But no one's naive enough to think that that's a sound way to save money or to invest. Imagine walking into the casino and calling it investing. Like, it's just dumb. And, when you trade your Bitcoin for, like you said, the altcoins or the NFTs, or, before that it was the ICOs, like, you get wrecked. And typically what starts the cycle is also what finishes it. You look back to 2013. Why was that driven? Well, we hit dollar parity, Mt. Gox fired up, and then Mt. Gox rugged and everything crashed. And then 2017, we had ICOs kicking things off. People were entering into the market through Bitcoin and then through ETH. And then what happened? ICOs got regulated and they started rugging people. Boom, crashed the market. 2021, we have, like you say, the alts and the NFTs and the meme coins. And what happened? FTX, the the poster child of memes and NFTs and meme coins. They rug, out it goes. And so what kickstarted this one was politicians and Michael Saylor. So does history repeat? I mean, time will tell. I certainly hope not. Maybe this is the split. Maybe this is where we get a better option, and we're learning from our mistakes. And I certainly think that could be a case. But I do know that there's a lot of single points of failure with Coinbase and the ETFs and where those coins are stored. And I think there could be some problems here. You look at Nayib Bukele recently, the IMF is throwing some carrots at him, $1 billion carrots. And, there's some rumblings underneath here bubbling up that maybe we're kind of like, what's going to happen here?
Yeah, and I mean, even Michael Saylor himself says buy Bitcoin. I think I heard in an interview it's better Bitcoin than MSTR, something along those lines. And I like that fastest horse with the casino. And my thought came up Bitcoin is kind of the fastest horse for freedom grab technology. If you want to have freedom, that's the fastest horse. If you just want to have a high number on some imaginary bank account, there might be better things for that. The Nayib Bukele, the IMF thing is interesting. What I understood is they said, hey, if you don't force the merchants to adopt Bitcoin as a payment method, then you get that thing. Is that what happened?
That's bang on from my understanding as well. I think that in and of itself is actually a positive thing. Actually, I think today probably a video went out that we filmed on this exact topic because I do believe that merchants should not be forced to accept Bitcoin. I think that's a great move. But, there's one of two ways to look at this here, and time will tell which way it was. Was Nayib Bukele playing chess and, kind of doing more than he wanted to do? Because let's be honest. He didn't really enforce that rule, right? There was never there was no governors walking around with sticks, secret shopping the Bitcoin merchants. It was very loosely regarded. And so was he playing chess and making it legal, not really enforcing it, and then now he gets $1 billion and the thing he didn't really used to enforce just kind of goes away? That's fine, right? That's great. Or is the IMF playing chess here? And are they saying, hey, let's just pick at this Bitcoin thing bit by bit. We'll give you $1 billion if you make it not mandatory, but we'll give you $3 billion if you make it illegal. And then you've got all this Bitcoin on your balance sheet. Well, why don't you sell that and we'll give you $10 billion. There's little tiny cracks in the foundation, and I think that again, these places are, you either think they're incompetent and this is why we're here, or you think they're evil and they're very smart and this is why we're here. And I probably fall on different sides of the track at different times. But if I wanted to make countries less sovereign, I would certainly give them bits of money that I completely control in order to make them do what I want. And I think that Bukele is getting a little bit of this taste of something that he's never had before.
All of a sudden he has leverage, and it's interesting how we will do it with that. And I was in El Salvador, not even a month ago.
Yeah, actually, that's where we met, I think, if I'm recalling correctly now.
Yeah, I sat with Nico on the news desk. He brought me up, and then there we met. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, but I was in El Salvador and I walked around and I was at 3 or 4 stores because I didn't have a lot of time outside of the Bitcoin conferences because there are lots happening in that week that weren't on the Bitcoin conference side, and none of them had Bitcoin payment methods. I picked the 4 wrong ones. So when this news broke, I was like, they didn't force, nobody forced the merchants. Obviously they didn't even knew about it. And that was one interesting thing. I was in San Salvador on the Volcano app, and you have to pay $2 of entry fee there. And you have to pay in cash $2. They didn't take credit cards and didn't take Bitcoin, and I didn't have
Wow.
cash with me.
Wow.
And they said like, oh yeah, you can go in, like no worries, you get it for free today. And I was like, hey, can I still give you Bitcoin? Like I have my Bitcoin wallet, I would love to give you Bitcoin. And they said like, no. I was like, you already let me in for free. Like I would just give you free Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So like it definitely is not forced by any means.
No, I had a similar experience. I paid at Walmart with Bitcoin, which was pretty cool, and then bought some Starbucks with Bitcoin. Also got turned away a couple times. I don't speak Spanish, so I speak very little Spanish. So I had a language barrier a little bit, which probably made it difficult. But I think at the end of the day, from what I understand there, like it was very centralized, the rollout. The Chivo app is government subsidized. There's very low trust for the Bitcoin apps. And so the citizens generally kind of don't really enjoy it. But I think that making it mandatory or making it not mandatory is probably a positive thing. Like I said, I want to know who's playing who in chess, because there is a world where Bukele had this planned all along and just wanted leverage to, that's a very basic negotiating tactic, right? Just throw something else that you want so you can easily take it away, to appease the other side. But I think the IMF now is like, oh, hey, he is movable. Like, let's see how far we can push this. And at the end of the day, is there enough money to make Bukele, make it illegal, go off the Bitcoin standard, whatever it might be, maybe. And who knows? It's hard to say.
Absolutely. It's always the answer they give, because people, I was in El Salvador, and naturally people ask you if you moved there for some reason. And I always answer like, this experiment with El Salvador hasn't gone on for long enough for me. Like I'm kind of root kind of guy. I'm not like moving too quick. I want to build roots somewhere, and I feel really good right now in Austria. And I have a lot of hope for the European politicians also, actually. But obviously there are better countries than Austria politics wise. But I have to see something sustainable. If I see it in the next like 5-10 years, if in 10 years, like the direction just goes in that direction, probably have to buy a higher property price for that. But I want to see something long term, and that's where I get with that. And the most amazing thing that I took away from El Salvador was I was at the Mi Primera Bitcoin graduation, and there, the founder, how is he called? I forgot his name. John. He said they're working on not only on educating the students, but now also on 400 teachers. They're educating them on Bitcoin, so they can educate the students all over the country. And they're building a Bitcoin department within the education department of El Salvador. So I think that's the way more bullish news for that, because yes, they can buy Bitcoin, but I don't care if a country has Bitcoin, honestly. Like I would rather, like, I think Germany selling Bitcoin is better than America buying them. I don't want countries to have Bitcoin, but that's a whole nother story. So I think that they're pushing towards education is amazing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, man. I think it's fantastic. I think that the experiment's been good. I think too, we can kind of see in real time what it does for a nation. You can just feel, I don't know if you felt this, but I could feel the optimism in El Salvador. There was just building projects going on. The streets felt safe. Like it felt very, very good. And it's more than just Bitcoin that does that, but you can definitely feel a positivity in the air over in that country.
Absolutely, really cool. One last question before we come to the final two questions of the end routine of the podcast. We talked about Bitcoin, the Bitcoinization, how this looks. With all those positive news coming out in this bull cycle now, and at the Christmas table, probably Bitcoin will be a discussion point. How close do you feel we are in kind of like percentage wise to this hyper Bitcoinization, to like a real suddenly phase moment of Bitcoin?
It's a good question. I don't know that I have a fully formed opinion on this. I think that we are probably entering into, over the next 5 years, everyone is going to have some exposure to Bitcoin directly or indirectly. But I wouldn't necessarily call that hyper Bitcoinization. I think hyper Bitcoinization probably needs one, maybe even two generations to happen. I don't think the old crusty suits in the Starbucks boardroom are going to do a sweeping Bitcoin accepted here policy. I don't think we're going to see massive corporations who currently spend billions lobbying governments switch that into owning Bitcoin. I think we need to see, the generation of my children growing up, like my kids grow up, they will never have a bank account ever. They have Bitcoin wallets since the day they were born. And, by the time they're old enough to be able to, to have to spend money in the fiat world, they will just be able to use a Bitcoin wallet account, the Bitcoin wallet card, and they, Bitcoin wallet will be their bridge into the fiat world, along with millions of other people at that time. And so I have very, very high hopes that that generation, which will then be taking over as the next, leaders of the corporations, will be, nixing or partially nixing the lobby, budgets and the ridiculous, bureaucratic nonsense in favor of Bitcoin. And so I would probably say we're one generation away from really starting to see, but like, man, like on my babysitter, not my babysitter, my kid's babysitter, we pay her in Bitcoin, and it's automatic for her. Like it took no explaining. She just got it. Get the app, here we go. It's all on Lightning. It's custodial. And then now we're starting to talk about self-custody, and she's got like, like 7 figures of sats. Like she's got like 1 million sats, which is, in Canada terms, about $1,500. Like it's not life-changing money by any stretch of imagination, but she's watched it grow. She's convinced. She's been reading about it. She's talking to her friends at school about it. And this is kind of how the process starts. And so, as she graduates and as she gets into the workforce and as she's saving her money and as she's having kids, she'll be like bringing apart this Bitcoin knowledge. So I think it's a ways away on the macro, but I think there's lots of steps between now and then. And I think that's going to continue very quickly.
I love that. Orange pilling one person at a time and coming closer to the Bitcoinization. We have one question that I asked each and every one of my guests, and that is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
I think it would probably be in the like humbleness, spirituality. Like I gave a presentation called Jesus is a Bitcoiner. And it's this thesis, this ethos that your Bitcoin journey leads you from, a pre-coiner. In my presentation, I say a pre-Bitcoin maximalist to a Bitcoin maximalist to a follower of Jesus. And if you walk through, the point of us humans, it's so much more than just, stack sats. I think summed up pretty nicely is stay humble, stack sats. And that's a really big concept throughout Jesus's life. And so I would say that's probably, it. I encourage everybody to investigate their relationship with Jesus. And people are like, oh, I don't believe in that. It's like, well, fine, that's a relationship. And I invite you to investigate that. Even a decision not to is a decision. And so I encourage everyone to think about this logically, think about your time preference. On the lowest time preference, you need to think about, what's after Earth, and maybe you think it's dust, and that's fine. And I would debate that with you happily. But it's probably not. And so if it's not, now we're into the meat of, well, what is it? And that's a fun journey to be on.
That is for sure, and I totally subscribe to that idea that non-decision is also a decision, especially if it comes to investment. A lot of people in Austria, I don't know if it's the same in Canada and the US, believe if you leave your money on the bank, it's a non-decision. Like, I don't want to take the decision where to invest my money.
Yeah.
No, you took the decision to invest in the euro.
Exactly, and that's it's like, it's too risky. I didn't want to make the call. It's like, sorry, that's not how life works. It's the physics of life where you just make decisions. And even when not, yeah.
You have to make the decision. Perfect. Then we come to the end routine of the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest is. And your question from the previous guest is, how do you see the future of pension funds?
Wow. So I probably see them as on the long term diminishing. Just again, pension funds are designed because you and I are too dumb to manage our own money, and we need some ability to have someone smarter than us do it over our entire career, so we at least have a shot at retirement. This is kind of the ethos of pension funds. On a Bitcoin standard, it gets incredibly easy to save money, especially from a young age. But I don't think it'll disappear overnight. I think we'll still have 25 years of like good, solid pension fund performance. However, there will be a time, undoubtedly, 100%, mark the clip, at remind me tweets, whatever the reminders are, pension funds will be rugging their investors in our lifetime. No questions asked. The fiat bubble is bursting, and pension funds will be one of the consequences of that. The money either won't be there, they'll have to be bailed out, or it will turn out that their assets they were holding were improperly secured or what have you. But pension funds, I think, over the long term don't exist. On the short term, they still exist, but be careful because they might rug you.
Do you have the choice to invest in them or not in Canada, or can you get your money out?
So we do have a choice. I don't think I contribute to anything. We do. So in Canada, as if you're an employee, you pay a CPP tax, a Canadian pension plan tax. I call it a tax. It's a contribution, they call it, I think, officially. But as someone that owns, like I've only ever worked, I worked as a bartender before I started the company. And so I've only ever kind of worked for myself in this way. As an entrepreneur who owns a business, you never contribute CPP because you don't pay yourself a T4 income or unemployment income. And so I think it's criminal and evident of a Ponzi scheme that you are forced to invest money with a pension fund. I think that it's like, it's just, you can just tell it's a Ponzi. And so I think that ideally it does become, not mandatory anymore. But if I look at who owns the pension funds and who's incentivized to keep the pension funds going, those incentives are misaligned already. And so I think they will remain mandatory, not because I think they should be mandatory, but because I think the communists in charge of the pension funds will continue to need them to be mandatory to keep the Ponzi alive.
Oh, yeah. Very true. Similar situation in Austria. Thank you so much, Adam, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah, hit me on Twitter at @AdamO'Brien_ or on Nostr, at adam@btcw.app is my NIPO5 verification. And then I would love, if you're in Canada or the USA, go to bitcoinwell.com, make an account, use the account, hit me up publicly or privately and tell me how we can improve. We are one step behind because we're bullish on self-custody and we're pushing the puck towards where it needs to be. And so we need the Bitcoiners that care about self-custody. If you care about the future of self-custody, please use Bitcoin well. Tell us how we can improve. This is going to happen together. It's not going to be because we've got, all the genius in one room, holding it behind. It's going to be decentralized. We're going to take feedback. We're going to implement feedback. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fix them, and we're going to march forward together. So use the platform. If you like it, let us know what we can change to make it better. If you don't like it, let us know what we can change to make it better.
Really cool. Thank you so much, Adam, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another guest. Bye-bye.